Hello and Assalamu alaikum. I am Kashif Kamran and I welcome you to the day 2 of the Advanced Audit and Assurance Practice to Pass session being organized by ACCA Pakistan for September 2019 examination. Now, on the day 2 of this Practice to Pass session, I will be focusing on evidence and procedures, which is yet another important area and a core syllabus area for the advanced audit and assurance exams. Now, to start on with the day 2 agenda, which is to look on procedures and evidence, two very important areas, and there are so many uh, weaknesses which exist among the students on the area of procedures and evidence, which I will be highlighting through the sessions today. Now, for the particular session today, I have chosen two exam questions, one from December 12 exam, the question number 2, and one from the December 11 exam, the question number 2. Then there are two home assignments, December 18, question number 2B, and June 14, question number 3A. Now, again, in my previous webinars from March 2018 to June 2019, I have covered this area on a very consistent basis. So if you want to have more practice of procedures and evidence, you have plenty of resources from March 18 webinar to June 19 webinar, where you can explore the areas of procedures and evidence. This time I have chosen two new questions from December 12 and December 11 exams, though they are very old questions, but they're very complex and very challenging questions. And with the type of questions which are now coming in the AAA exams in the recent past, and with the type of maturity that is now coming in the recent exam sessions, it is very, very important for a student to know the December 12 and December 11 exam papers because they're really, really challenging questions. And you will be understanding both these questions in my session today. So let's first start on with the proceedings of understanding what procedures and evidence are, and then start on with the exam practice. Now, just like yesterday, I need to focus on few important things before I start drilling the exam papers. Now, just as I was using a Word file yesterday, I will be using the same Word file today and to set up the agenda for the day 2. Now, what exactly are we doing on day 2 in terms of procedures and evidence? The very first thing is to know the requirements, what exactly the examiner asks for when a question comes on procedures and evidence. Then to look at the examiner expectations around the requirements. What are examiner expectations around the requirements which are put in the exam papers and the knowledge? What knowledge we should have in mind attempting the requirements on procedures and evidence. Then the third very important thing where I even had a strong emphasis yesterday is to look at the marking schemes. And finally is the drilling process where I need to drill December 12 and December 11 questions. Now, that is my focus today, right? Starting first with looking at what exactly the question asks for. Then what are examiner expectations and are we meeting those expectations of the examiner? Because if we are not meeting those expectations, we are not getting good marks on procedures and evidence. Then to look at the knowledge, and the knowledge again will come from the examiner article. Examiner has written an article on procedures, which will give you a very good insight about how to write procedures in the exam paper. Then obviously all of you should be aware of the marking scheme. I need to emphasize upon the marking scheme that how many marks you get when you write procedures and how many marks you get when you write evidence. And finally, we need to look into the drilling process, attempting exam questions so you know how to write and what to write. So what and how to write will come into the drilling process. Okay, let's first start understanding the requirements. Now, when you look at the requirements of a question on procedures and evidence, first of all, be very sure that procedures is such a scattered area in the AAA exam paper. When you look at procedures, normally procedures on the accounting matters normally fall in the question number one, because the question number one, as we were discussing yesterday, is a question on risk. And in the risk question, there are so many accounting treatments. So normally, the examiner has a tendency of asking procedures on accounting matters in the very first question. So procedures do come on accounting issues and normally a part of the question number one. Then procedures also come as part of other assignments. Now, if procedures are part of other assignments, I am doing other assignments on day 4. So eventually, I will be doing the drilling of the procedures for other assignments on the day 4 of this Practice to Pass webinar. But if if in the other assignments the procedures do come, we know in the other assignments there is an area known as forensic, which is very habitual of procedures. And then there is an area which is known as audit of performance information, where procedures is a very regular feature. So as a student, you should first know where can you find procedures. You can find them in the first question, which pertains with accounting issues. You can then find them in the areas of other assignments, specifically in the area of forensic, and then in the area of the audit of performance information. And these are two areas which will be specifically addressed on the 4th day. Now, what exactly the examiner asks for in a procedure? That's very simple. When you look at the requirements for procedures, the requirements are very simple. The requirements simply ask for recommend the audit procedures. There is no complexity, right? There is no complexity for procedures requirement because it's a very simple looking requirement. Recommend the audit procedures on a fill in the blank. And there is a question mark, and the examiner will give you certain marks after the question mark. It might be 5, it might be 7, it might be 9, it might be 10. So recommend the audit procedures. Now, what the examiner expects from you when he gives you the requirement, recommend the audit procedures. I will be covering that into the second phase. Now, when you look at the second side of the story, the second side of the story is about evidence. Now, when you look at the evidence, in the case of evidence, the evidence comes in the question number 2, because I was discussing that yesterday, that the question number 2 is a question on completion stage of the audit, completion and reporting stage of audit. And in terms of the completion stage, the examiner asks you a question on evidence, which is a very typical question, which has been such a regular feature of the AAA exams in almost every previous exam sittings. In terms of question 2, when you find evidence, what is the requirement of evidence? The requirement of evidence is like this: comment on the matters and explain the evidence you should expect to find in the review of the working paper file. Now, this is a completion stage question, right? Examiner says evidence you should expect to find in the review of the working paper. Now, you are a manager and you are reviewing the working paper, and all of you know that the working papers are reviewed at the completion stage. So when you are reviewing the working papers at the completion stage, being a manager, what evidence you should expect to find in the review of the working paper? So the question focus is on you being the manager and you conducting the review, and what evidence will you expect to find when you are conducting a review of the working paper file. But with that, with the requirement of evidence, there is another requirement which is asking for comment on the matters. Now that's something which will get into the second phase of my discussion today. Exactly what does this mean? So this is the requirement which comes on evidence, comment on the matters and explain the evidence you should expect to find in the review of the working paper file. Or at times, the examiner shortened the question by just simply asking, explain the evidence you should expect to find in the review of the working paper file. So examiner has shortened the question by removing comment on the matters. So either you get a question with comment on the matters and explain the evidence you should expect to find in the review of the working paper file, or you get a shortened question which is explain the evidence you should expect to find in the review of the working paper file. Now, that is the requirements. And if any one of you is repeating the AAA exams, you're very familiar with these requirements, procedures, and evidence. And these requirements might not be a new requirement for you. It's more important to understand the expectations of the examiner around these requirements and then looking at the marking scheme. Now, let's first start on with procedures. Now, when we look at procedures as the very first thing, what does an examiner expects from you in terms of procedures? What is an examiner expectations versus the marking scheme? That's very simple. The marking scheme is 1 mark per procedure. So the marking scheme is very simple, right? 1 mark per procedure. But what is an examiner expectation against this 1 mark? When will the examining team reward you this 1 mark? So let's see the rewarding process of this 1 mark per procedure. Now, when you look at this 1 mark per procedure versus the examiner expectations, the examiner says that what is a good procedure? What is a good procedure? And where, where would you get the answer for what is a good procedure? You will go to the examiner article, which I've shared as a resource for the day 2, which is right here in front of your screen. This is the examiner article, which has been the examiner article part 4. And this part 4 article is about audit procedures. This is such a good article if you read it from the start to the end, because it will tell you about what is a good procedure and what is a bad procedure. So try finding time to read this article in full so that you have a fair idea about what is a good procedure and what is a bad procedure. And even examiner tells you in this article in which areas procedures are normally examined, which I've already told you that procedures comes on accounting issues and they do come on other assignments. Now let's find a definition of what is a good procedure. Now, when you look at the conclusion of this article, the examiner makes a summary telling, as can be seen from the discussion above, a good structure for presenting procedure, bracket, action, source, purpose is key to obtaining strong marks on this section of the exam. So examiner is saying if you want to have a good procedure and taking good marks, then a procedure should have action, source, purpose is a key to obtaining strong marks in this area. So that's very simple. Examiner is saying if you write an action, you write a source, and you write a purpose in a procedure, then you are getting strong marks. So that's the very first thing. Then the examiner says, for a candidate to score well, they will need to be able to adapt the procedure to a given scenario. So second thing is that you cannot rote learn a procedure. You need to adapt the procedure because you will be writing the procedure looking at a case study. So you cannot just go in the exam hall learning the procedures, but you need to see the case study and then you need to adapt the procedures according to the case study. So examiner says past question practice is a good start. So if you practice more, you will learn how to write an action, how to write a source, and how to write a purpose. And if you practice the past papers, you will also get to know how to adapt your procedures in exam paper. So what is the definition of a good procedure? The examiner is telling us the good procedure to get 1 mark should contain number one, an action plus a source and a purpose. So that's make a definition of a good procedure. And secondly, the examiner says it should be adaptive to the case study. That is not something difficult. I will be demonstrating that in my drilling process today, that action, source, purpose, and it has to be adaptive. Let's take an example. If I say review the fixed asset register. Now see what I have done. Review is the action. Fixed asset register is the source. But then I have to write the purpose. Review the fixed asset register to confirm to confirm that to confirm the class of assets, cost of assets, and their book values. This is one example, right? Review the fixed asset register. So review is the action, right? Fixed asset register is the source. To confirm is the reason. So examiner is saying if you have these three things in your procedure, this is a rewarding procedure. Take another example. Recalculate the depreciation expense. Recalculate the depreciation expense to confirm that the depreciation expense is accurately calculated. To confirm that the depreciation expense is accurate. Now see, again you wrote recalculate. Recalculate was your action. Source, you were recalculating the depreciation expense, right? And what you confirm from that? You confirm that the depreciation expense is accurate. The depreciation expense is accurate. So every time when you write a good procedure, you should have a action, a source, and a purpose. Take another example. Discuss. Discuss with management. Source. Management becomes the source. Discuss becomes the action. Discuss with management the reason why there had been a significant increase in sales figure from the last year. Now see this, discuss became your action, management became your source, reason why there had been a significant increase is your purpose. Why are we discussing with the management? What's the purpose of discussing with management? To know the reason why there had been a significant increase. So can you understand the action, source, and purpose through these examples? If I can get your quick yes and no feedback. Can you understand the action, source, and purpose? Every time you write a procedure, you need to write a procedure with an action, a source, and a purpose. Is that something difficult to do in exam paper to first think about an action, then think about a source, and then think about the purpose? So examiner is saying if you do that, that is a good procedure. So is that a difficult definition of a good procedure to remember for exam paper? So when you're writing the procedure at home before the exam paper, will you make sure that your procedure have an action, source, and purpose? Will you do your self-checking back at home? Will you check your own procedure? right? So when you're writing a procedure at home, will you recheck your procedure that it has an action, it has a source, and it has a purpose? So if it is that way, then it becomes a good procedure for exam paper, right? So a lot of time student writes action, source, but they don't write a purpose. At a lot of time the student uh, just write a source and a purpose. They don't write an action. So start to write your procedures with actions. There are so many actions, right? Analyze is an action, discuss is an action, recalculate is an action, review is an action. There are so many actions, right? So action, source, and purpose, right? So three things, right? Three things have to be in a procedure, and a procedure starts with an action, right? You cannot start a procedure with the source. Procedure has to start with an action because you're writing a procedure. Procedure means to do something. So you have to start writing a procedure with do something. So the do something has to come from action. Then it has to be adaptive. You need to see the case study, right? You need to see the case study. What is exactly happening in the case study? So try to see the case and exactly what is happening in the case to decide your action, source, and purpose. So I will be doing a drilling on that, adaptive. So I cannot explain adaptive through examples, but I can explain you adaptive through a case study, which comes in the later part of the webinar today. Is everyone clear on a 1 mark per procedure and how to go about it? Is everyone clear about how to go down with 1 mark per procedure and a definition of a good procedure and how to take marks before we get to the drilling process of a procedure, right? Okay, let's do the second thing. There is an examiner article which I will be covering on the day 4 more specifically, but I just want to give you a hint of that. There is a topic which will fall on my 4th day, which is known as audit of performance information. And perhaps all of you must be knowing this is an other assignment which is part of your AAA syllabus, right? And this falls under the day 4 of this Practice to Pass webinar. You must have seen questions on audit of performance information in the past papers, normally known as key performing indicators. You must have seen social environmental performance questions in the past paper, right? Which relates to this topic, audit of performance information. Now, when you look at audit of performance information, which is a very specific topic, examiner wrote an article on this topic, and in this article, the examiner wrote that there is a list of procedures. Though the examiner wrote this article for procedures for performance information, but you can learn something from the article. Let's go to the article and see what procedures the examiner told us in the article, and can we use them in other contexts apart from performance information? Now, this is the article I am referring to, which the examiner wrote on a topic which is known as performance information in the public sector. We will be coming across this article on the 4th day of the webinar. But the reason of just going through it today is that it contains procedures, because this topic also contains procedures. Now, if you go down this article, examiner has written procedures for the particular topic. See this in front of your screen. Examiner says audit procedures may include: number one, test of controls. Now, please remember these are specific procedures for this topic, which is audit of performance information, but we can get something out of this for our remaining areas. Examiner says audit procedures may include test of controls. We know we don't use much test of controls in P7 paper, apart from when a question is on performance information. So we can just sideline test of controls till the time we come on the day 4. But look at the other procedures. Examiner says it includes performing analytical review. Number 2, performing analytical review. Number 3, discussion with management. Number 4th, review minutes of the meeting. Review minutes of the meeting. Number fifth, confirmation of performance information to source document. Source document. How many times when we are writing a procedure, we try to confirm things from a source document, like review the fixed asset register. Fixed asset register is a source document. Review the cash book. Cash book is a source document. Review the bank statement. The bank statement is a source document. Review the grant agreement. The grant agreement is a source document. So we try to review the source document, right? So examiner is saying even checking the source document is a procedure. And then finally, examiner says recalculation. Now see this list. Apart from test of controls, which is such a specific procedure to the topic performance information, can you look at the other five? Analytical review, discussion with management, minutes of the meeting, confirmation to the source document, and recalculation. So can we take this list to our Word file and think about what are procedures? Procedures includes minutes of the meeting, source documents, recalculations. They include analytical procedures, and they also includes discussions with the management. Now, are these good procedures which can be utilized in many areas of the AAA exam? Minutes of the meetings, source documents, recalculations, analytical procedures, discussion with management? Or they can just be used for the area where the examiner wrote an article? Can I get your quick response? Yes, test of control is a unique procedure, right? Which can be used in the context where the article has been written. But apart from the test of controls, the one which is in front of your screen, now, can we use them anywhere in the paper? So is it like easier for you to think about the minutes and the source document and the recalculations, the analytical procedures and the discussions? And I hope you believe these are more common procedures in the triple exam, right? Now just go down and think about that. There is a very there is a very important criticism of the examiner about the minutes of the meeting. Board minutes. Board minutes is such a good procedure, right? But examiner has a criticism about the board minutes. Examiner thinks that the students try to use the board minutes uh, very uh, in almost like every situation. Now let's first see the criticism of the board minutes, that are we using them in the right manner in the exam paper, or we are not using them in the right manner in the exam paper. I just want to show you a criticism of the examiner um, right in front of your screen. See this criticism of the examiner. This is from the March 19 exams, very recent exams. The examiner is saying focusing on board minutes where this was not an appropriate source of a procedure, Students have a tendency of forcing the board minutes in almost every situation. You need to understand that board minutes belongs to the strategic management, and strategic management will only be discussing important things relating to the company, right? You can think about board minutes in exam paper when the criticism of the examiner is that the student fit in all contexts the board minutes. But how should we be going about board minutes? How you should go about board minutes? Think realistically. Board minutes are for important things, right? You cannot get board minutes for minor things. For example, the company is purchasing a computer. You will not have a board minute for a single computer purchase. Rather, you will have a board minutes for the approval of the capital expenditure budget. Is that true? Will the board minutes authorize a single purchase of an asset? Or will the board minutes authorize the whole capital expenditure? Right? So a lot of time, if there is a purchase of a vehicle, the student right review the board minutes to confirm the approval of the purchase of a vehicle. Will the board approve the purchase of a single vehicle? Yes or no? Will a board approve the purchase of a single vehicle? Or will they approve the whole capital expenditure? So the examiner says the student try to force the board minutes in all context. Important things, right? Important things like number one, the capital expenditure budget. They approve the capital expenditure budgets, merger or acquisitions, asset held for sale, asset held for sale, a disposal. So the management tries to assure important things right from the board minutes. So if there is an important thing in the question, like a merger or an acquisition, then you can think about the board minutes. If there is a very important decision, like there was a disaster in a company, there was an accident in a company which caused the going concern issues for the business, then you might get the board minutes for. But try to remember the board minutes are for big things. The board minutes are for major issues, right? The board minutes cannot be for small things. Is everyone clear on the mindset of the board minutes? So will you be using board minutes for minor things in exam paper? Rather, you will be using them for major things in exam paper. So minutes of the meeting is a wonderful procedure, right? But with that wonderful procedure, there are some limitations which you need to keep in mind, right? Then comes to the second thing, the source document. There can be so many source documents, right, in the exam paper, like a lease agreement, like a grant agreement, like a bank statement, like a fixed asset register. So I hope all of you are familiar with the source documents, right? Sales invoice. These are all source documents. So is there a need to review these source documents? Is there a need to review these source documents like expert reports? So do you understand the importance of source documents and reviewing the source documents? Then the recalculation is such an important procedure, right? So many times we do the recalculations, like the recalculation of the deferred tax, recalculation of the amortization expense, recalculation of the amortization expense, recalculation of the impairment working, recalculation of the recoverable amount, recalculation of the depreciation expense, recalculation of the finance cost, right? So many times, right, in the exam paper we do recalculations, we go into the source documents, we look into the board minutes, right? We look into the board minutes. Then analytical procedures, such an important source. We do analytical procedures, right, in exam paper. Even if you were in the session yesterday for the work in progress, did we identify how much work in progress has increased from the last year to the current year in the day one yesterday? So in the day one yesterday, did we find how much work in progress have increased from the last year to this year? So was that an analytical procedure itself? So analytical procedures is to find the increase or decrease over the last year, or the analytical procedures is about like analyzing the receivable days, or analyzing the inventory days. So even the ratio analysis, right, is part of the analytical procedures, right? And then the final thing was discussion with management. How many times we discuss things with management, discuss with management, or even discuss with those charged with governance. So in the case study, there might be so many issues, right? There might be so many issues, problems, which you need to discuss with managements, right? So is this list clear to everyone? Recalculations, discussions with management, analytical procedures, looking into the source document and the board minutes. And is everyone clear on the criticism of the board minutes? The examiner says the student tends to use the board minutes in the wrong context. So is everyone structurally clear on procedures? 1 mark per procedure, right? How many marks will we get for a procedure? How many marks will we get for one single procedure? 1. And to write a good procedure, what should we do? For a good procedure, we should have how many things in a procedure? How many things in a procedure will make it good? Action, source, and purpose. That's wonderful, right? And can you think about common procedures in exam paper like board minutes, recalculations, analytical procedures, discuss? So please try finding time reading examiner articles because you can get so many good things from examiner article. This action, source, and purpose has come from the examiner article, right? And even this list of procedures, which is right in front of your screen, has also come from the examiner article. So examiner articles are a wonderful resource where you should be spending time on and try to identify some important paragraphs from the examiner article which really matters for your exam paper. Okay, now out of procedures, I'm going down into making a structure for evidence, and then we'll start on with the drilling process. Okay, let's take the second step now, and let's start on with evidence. Now, when you look at the question 2 mostly in the new context, in the new format of the paper, which is applicable since September 18. In the question 2, you can find a question on evidence, and we just had a discussion on how would you get a question on evidence, right? The question would ask you, I'm just taking the requirement from the top because I just wrote the requirement over here, that the requirement of this question would be comment on the matters and explain the evidence in the working paper file. Now, what to do around this requirement? What is the examiner expectation from this requirement? Expectations versus marks. Let's do the first thing. Expectation. First expectation, understand what is being asked. Is the examiner asking us to do two things here? Comment on the matter is one thing, and then evidence you should expect to find in the working paper file is the second thing. Is everyone getting that message? Understand what is being asked for. So are there two things the examiner is asking for? Right? So the first thing is comment on the matters. Right now, when you look at the comment on the matters, and what exactly the examiner means from comment on the matter. Now, if you remember the day one yesterday, when we were attempting a question on risk of material misstatement, we find a definition of that when we are writing a risk of material misstatement, we write the materiality, we write the treatment, we write the risk, and we write the impact. Do everyone remembers that from the session yesterday? Materiality, treatment, risk, impact. And how many marks were we getting for that yesterday in that context? 3. You are doing exactly the same here, but the marking scheme will change now. When the examiner says comment on the matters, so you're commenting on the materiality, you're commenting on the treatment, you're commenting on the risk, as well as the impact. But the marking scheme is different. For materiality comment, you will take 1.5 marks. For the treatment comment, you will take another 1.5 marks. And for the risk and the impact together, for risk and impact together, you will take 1.5 marks. So in total, you're taking 4.5 marks. So if everyone knows risk of material misstatement, can you easily answer this question in the exam paper? Comment on the matters. If you know how to answer a risk of material misstatement question, can you easily answer comment on the matters in exam paper? And the length of the answer will remain the same as we were writing yesterday, right? The length of the answer will remain the same as we were writing yesterday, though you're still getting higher marks, 4.5 marks. So do everyone remember how we drafted a paragraph on ROMM yesterday? Right, so and is everyone clear on the marking scheme now? So when you write an ROMM, you get 3 marks in a question number 1, right? But when you're writing the same thing in a question on evidence, you're getting straight away 4.5 marks. Okay, the second requirement is evidence. You should expect to find in the review of the working paper file. So I normally tell students that imagine you are a manager, which you need to imagine, right? Uh, Across the 100 marks paper. Now, you have a file in front of you, a working paper file, and you are reviewing the working paper file of your junior or of your senior, and what evidence you should expect to find in the working paper file. So try to imagine a file in front of you and try to imagine you are a manager and you're looking at a file of your junior or of your senior relating to the government grant or relating to the lease or relating to revaluation. We covered across these areas yesterday in the session, right? Revaluation as a risk, government grant as a risk, right? Work in progress as a risk. So try to imagine you're reviewing a working paper file of a work in progress, or you're reviewing a working paper file of the government grant, or you're reviewing the working paper file of a revaluation. What evidence would you expect to find in the working paper file? Right? Now think evidence. Evidence has to be something in the form of being tangible. Evidence has to be tangible because you're finding that in the working paper file. So do you all believe that in the working paper file we will have papers? And papers is something which is tangible, right? So evidence, right? Evidence is tangible. Tangible means working paper file. Working paper file means papers. So do you all understand evidence is tangible, right? Now, for example, when you are reviewing the working paper file of the government grant, let's take an example. Working paper file of the government grant. Did we did this yesterday in the session, the government grant, right? So you are reviewing the file of the government grant, right? What what working papers will you expect to find in the grant file? Number one, the copy of the grant agreement to confirm the amount and the conditions of the grant received from the government. So can you see this word copy coming as an additional word here? Because when I'm speaking of the working paper file, can I put the management documents in original form in my working paper file? Can I put the documents in original form in my working paper file? No. Will I have copy of these documents? Now, do you remember additional information yesterday? That is what we were obtaining from the management, right? So when we were obtaining from the management, we were saying grant agreement. You remember that? When we were obtaining it from the management, we were saying grant agreement. But when we are saying the working paper file, we are saying copy of the grant agreement, right? Is that clear to everyone? How we wrote the additional information yesterday and how we are writing the working paper file today? So it's the copy of the grant. Why copy? Because we cannot put original things. We cannot put original things in the working paper file because the grant agreement belongs to the management. Okay, second, we got a grant, right? Of how much million dollar was the grant yesterday? 10 million. Have we received this grant of $10 million? So what's the evidence of this $10 million grant? Where can I confirm the receipt of the grant? The receipt of the grant would be in the bank statement, right? Because I got the grant. So copy of the bank statement to confirm the receipt of the grant. Copy of the bank statement, right? To confirm the receipt of the grant or the cash book. But can you understand why are we putting the word copy? Is everyone clear on that? Why are we putting that additional word copy? Okay, then goes to the next thing. Was there a condition? Was there a condition with the grant? Was there a condition with the grant that the business operation should continue by 2020 for the next 5 years? We were standing in 2015 yesterday, right? And the business operation should continue by 2020. So is that something subjective, the next 5 years? Will the business operation continue for the next 5 years or not? Is that something very subjective? So we must have asked the management about their intentions to continue operation in the next 5 years, right? Do you all agree with that? We must have asked the management about their intentions to continue operations in the next 5 years. So when I discuss with management, discuss is a procedure, right? When I discuss with the management, what will I have in my working paper file? If I'm discussing with management something, then what evidence will I have in my working paper file? I will have notes of discussions, notes of discussion with management to confirm their intentions, to confirm their intentions to continue operations for the next 5 years. So do you all agree discussion is a procedure? Discussion is a procedure. What evidence we will have for discussion in the file? Notes of discussion. So notes of discussion will become the evidence I will be having in my working paper file. Next 5 years is very subjective, right? So can I take a representation letter from the management on the subjective areas like the next 5 years to confirm the business will continue in the next 5 years? So can I have a representation letter? So, but the representation letter in my working paper file will be in the original form, right? I cannot have a copy of the representation letter because the management will write a representation letter to me being an auditor. So do you all agree we need to write the word copy with the representation letter? Should we write the word copy with the representation letter? Should we write the word copy with the representation letter? And is everyone clear? Why are we not writing the word copy with the representation letter? Right? So anything which belongs to the auditor, like the representation letter to confirm that the business will continue, the business will continue to operate in the next 5 years. Right. If something belongs to the auditor, we never write the word copyright. If something belongs to the management, we write the word copy. Please be very clear. If something belongs to the management, we write the word copy. Discussions is the auditor discussion, right? We cannot have copy of the discussion because it is the auditor's discussion, right? So we'll say notes of discussion. Only if something belongs to the management, like a document which belongs to the management, right? Then only we write the word copy. Now, for example, take another example. Let's take some final examples here, right? If I review the board minutes, this is my procedure, right? Let's make it this way. I normally do that in my sessions just to make students very clear on this. Okay, if I review the board minutes, I hope all of you agree that is the procedure, right? Review the board minutes. Now, what evidence will I have in my file that I reviewed the board minutes? What evidence will I have in my file that I've reviewed the board minutes? So the evidence I will have in my file is copy of the board minutes. Okay, that's good. Number two, if I say discuss with management, do you all believe discuss with management is a procedure? So what evidence of discussion will I have in my file? Notes of discussion, not copy of the notes, notes of discussion, because it's my own notes. Are these management notes? Are these management notes, or is it the notes which I am taking as an auditor? So why some of the student is saying a copy of the notes? Is it the management notes, or is it the note I am taking? Right? Notes of discussion. Okay, if I say obtain the representation letter, obtain the representation letter. So obtain means a procedure, right? Obtain the representation letter from the management. What evidence will I have in my file? Just the representation letter. Okay, now let's get to the difficult one. Recalculate the amortization expense. Recalculate the amortization expense. Now, if the auditor recalculates something, what evidence will he have in the file that he recalculated? How will the manager know that you recalculated something? So in my working paper file, if I recalculate something, I will have the results. I will have the results of the recalculation. Auditor analyze the receivable days. Do you all believe analyze the receivable day is a procedure? And if the auditor analyze the receivable days, so he will have the results of the analysis of receivable days in the working paper file. Is this column in front of your screen making things clear for you? That on the left hand side, we have procedures, but please, you need to understand something, because there are some questions been coming from students which I'm monitoring, and I'll try to answer at the end of the session. That when you look at the column on the left, then try to ask a question to yourself. What evidence in working papers? This is the question you need to ask yourself. Now, if I say review the board minutes, ask yourself what evidence in the working paper file. Discuss with management what evidence in the working paper file. So something has to go in the working papers, right? So it's a very simple rule that if a document belongs to management, we write the word copy. So there can be hundreds of management documents, right? Cost card, sales invoice, good receiving note, good dispatch note, lease agreement, loan agreement. There can be hundreds of management documents, cash book, fixed asset register. So do I need to tell every time that you need to write a word copy with the management document? Is everyone clear with that? Any management document in the working paper file will have the word copy. Is that clear with everyone? And if the auditor is discussing something with the management, then what will we have? If the auditor is discussing something with management, what evidence we will have in the file? Notes. Okay. And if the auditor is recalculating something, then what evidence in the file? Results. Okay. And if the auditor is analyzing something, then what evidence in the file? Okay. And if it is a management document, if it is a management document, a copy of that, right? Is everyone clear when to use copy, when to use notes, when to use results, right? So are you getting the difference between writing a procedure which starts with an action and writing evidence which starts with something tangible? Will you remember that evidence is in the file and it has to be in a tangible form? Is everyone clear between tangible and an action? Procedure starts with quick answers, right? Procedure starts with an action and an evidence starts with something. Evidence starts with something which is tangible, tangible, document. Okay, is everyone clear on how to go about it? How many marks will I get per evidence? Per evidence, I will be getting 1 mark. 1 mark per evidence with reason, right? With reason. If I say copy of the board minutes, I will say to confirm something. So I have to write the reason after copy of the board minutes, or I say results of recalculation to confirm, I have to write the reason after. So is everyone clear on the marking scheme of comment on the matters? Comment on the matters, 4.5 marks. And is everyone clear on the marking scheme of evidence? 1 mark per evidence. So that is the structure, right? Which we need to go through. Now I'm just doing one quick recap and I'm off to the drilling process. Now, is everyone clear on the scope of day two? On the day two, we are doing procedures and evidence. Is everyone clear about the requirement of the exam paper which comes on procedures? Is everyone clear on the requirement of the exam paper which comes on procedures? And is everyone clear on the marking scheme of the procedures? And the action, source, and purpose. And not to unnecessarily use the board minutes. Not to unnecessarily use the board minutes. Only use the board minutes when they are to be logically used. Is everyone clear on that? Then when you look at the evidence question consists of comment on the matters. Is everyone clear that when we write comment on the matters, we write materiality, treatment, risk, and impact, just like we were doing it yesterday on a risk of material misstatement question, and we will be scoring 4.5 marks. And then we are writing the evidence in the working paper file. In terms of the evidence in the working paper file, you need to think about a copy, notes, results, because these are some things which should come in the working paper. Is everyone clear on the structure, the marking scheme, and the expectations of the examiner? If I can get your quick feedback about so far, so forth, the understanding into the very first 1 hour of this session. Because into the next 2 hours now, we have to go through the drilling process. Is everyone sound on knowledge, procedures, and evidence? Okay, perfect. Now, one last thing. There was a question from a student. I don't know the name, but the student was asking about why am I attempting December 11 and December 12 questions when I have recommended that you should do the recent papers. The reason I've chosen December 11 and December 12, I made that very clear at the beginning of the session. These are most challenging questions which have come on evidence. These are the most challenging questions which have come on evidence. And with the type of maturity the examiner is showing in the recent papers, you cannot ignore December 11 and December 12 evidence and go to the exam hall. So the reason of choosing December 11 and December 12, though I've done so many questions on evidence and procedures in my previous webinars and more recent questions, I thought it's better to do December 11 and December 12 because of the reason that there has been dramatic changes in the way the examiner is testing the questions in the last two exam sittings. So if you are unaware of December 11 and December 12, and a question like that comes to your exam sitting, you might be amazed to know how challenging these questions are. So is everyone clear of the reason of choosing December 11 and December 12? Because they are challenging. And once I portray those questions in front of your screen, most of you will fail to understand in the first go what is the question asking. They're such difficult questions, right? So if you want to do the recent papers, you can see my June 19 webinar, my March 19 webinar, my December 18 webinar, and obviously you have to practice the recent papers. But obviously I have chosen these questions with a purpose. Yes, they were. The last two exam sittings were challenging, but we have seen that the examiner is picking the questions from the past bank. Examiner is picking questions from the past bank, and at times the examiner picks questions from 13, 14, 12. What if the examiner in the upcoming exam settings picks some questions from 11 and 12? So examiner is doing that, right? Examiner is trying to pick questions from the previous attempts and then modifying them. So there is a chance that the examiner might go down to 11 and 12 exams and try to put a question in exam paper, modifying them. So for that risk and for that reason, we're going through the December 11 and December 12. Okay, let's do the structure, and then we are going on to a break, and resuming break, we are starting on with the drilling. Let's first make a structure of the December 11 paper. Okay, the first question, we're starting into the drilling phase, is December 2011. Question number 2. And this question is the first one we are going into the process of drilling. Okay, let's open the question and let's see what exactly is the examiner asking us. Okay, so this is the December 11 exams right in front of your screen. It has been shared with you. And from the December 11 exam, I've chosen a question with a purpose. And you will understand that in the next 5 minutes, the purpose of choosing this question. Now, when you look at the question number 2, which is right in front of your screen now, this is a question 2 and a very complex question way back to December 2011 exams. In this question, there is a requirement which you can see in front of your screen, and this requirement is asking for 15 marks situation. See this? There is a 15 marks requirement right in front of your screen. I have bracketed that with blue. Can you just read that in 2 minutes and understand what exactly is the examiner asking for? So please try to read the requirement A yourself in like a minute and try to understand. Suppose this is the question in front of you in the September 19 exams, and you're sitting in an exam hall and you get this requirement for 15 marks. Try to understand what is the examiner asking. Okay, has everyone read this requirement? Did you got how complex this requirement is? So many things being asked at one go. So did you understand the challenge? Have you seen so many requirements coming jumbled up? So is it an easier question? December 11, question number 2. So have you ever practiced this question? I'm asking this question to those who are repeating the exams. Have you ever tried practicing this question? So did you got a message? What if a type of this question comes in September 19 and you come out of the exam hall and you get to know this is from December 11 exams? You will be regretting yourself, right? You will be regretting yourself. Okay, now let's see what exactly that means. I'm taking this requirement from here to my Word file because I need to deeply analyze this requirement. Okay, let's copy paste this requirement here and try to understand what exactly is the requirement asking for 15 marks. Okay, I'll be going on to the break in the next 10 minutes, right? So just hold your patience for the next 10 minutes. I'm just understanding the requirement, and post break, I'll start doing the question. See what is the question saying. Assess the audit implication of the three issues. So we have three issues in the case study. So we need to assess the audit implication of the three issues related to the audit work raised by the audit senior. Assess. Now, is the examiner telling us what we should assess? Then the examiner says after the full stop, your assessment should consider. So is the examiner giving us the breakup of assess? Assess the implication of the three issues, right? But what we should assess? The examiner is saying your assessment. So we need to assess what. We need to assess what the examiner is saying your assessment should consider. Number one, sufficiency of the evidence obtained. So what's the first thing we need to consider about the three issues? Sufficiency of the evidence obtained. Number two, comma, explain any adjustments that may be necessary to the financial statement. Explain any adjustments that may be necessary to the financial statement. So we need to explain the adjustments. Adjustments means the accounting entries. Adjustments necessary to the financial statements. Now, what if this requirement comes to your exam paper, adjustments necessary? Have you seen this requirement in the past papers, adjustments necessary? This is such a once in a blue moon requirement. It comes once after several years. So is this question giving you a good insight? Sufficiency of the evidence obtained, one. Adjustments necessary to the financial statement, two. Then the examiner says, describe the impact on the audit report if these adjustments are not made. So if the adjustments are not made, impact on the report, impact on the audit report. Have you seen such a jumbled question which is asking for evidence, adjustments, reports, and procedures together? So is it testing the whole syllabus here? So impact on the audit report. If adjustments are not made. And the final thing the examiner is asking, you should also recommend any further audit procedures. So you need to recommend audit procedures. Which audit procedures? Further. Further means the one given in the case, you will not do them. Further means extra. So you need to recommend further. Further means extra procedures. How many things are we doing for 3 issues? For every issue, how many things are we doing? For every issue, how many things are we doing? 4 things, right? So do we have 3 issues? And for every issue, we have to do 4 things. And how many marks we have per issue? Per issue, how many marks we have? How many marks we have in total? 15. So per issue, how many marks we have? 5, right? So that's something very simple, right? If I just do it this way, let's do it this way and just make it better. Let me make a table, like a table like this, and then let me make the columns of the 3 issues. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, and this. Okay. Okay, we have the issue 1, right? We have the issue 2, and we have the issue 3. Why are we making the table? Can we make table in the exam paper? No. Why are we making the table? Just to make things look better and understandable for the session, right? Okay, issue 1, issue 2, issue 3. How many marks we have for issue 1? 5 marks. How many marks we have for issue 2? Again, the 5 marks. How many marks we have for issue 3? Again, the 5 marks. So we have 5 marks for each issue, right? Now, I need to gain 5 marks, right? So I'm very flexible. Suppose I write one sufficiency of evidence, I write one adjustment, I write, obviously there is one impact on the report, 1 to 3, and I write 2 procedures. Am I taking a 5 marks? For example, I write one sufficiency on evidence, I write one adjustment. Obviously, adjustment has to be one, right? Adjustment cannot be more than one. Impact on the report cannot be more than one. There has to be one impact on the report. So these marks are blocked. Do you agree? These marks are blocked 1 and 1. One for adjustment, there cannot be more than one adjustment. One for impact, there cannot be more than one impact. Then again, one for adjustment and one for impact. Now, the remaining marks have to be bifurcated between 1 and 4. Are you getting this point? Adjustment and impact is 1 and 1. So how many marks I am left with? 3, 3, 3. Now I can write more sufficiencies and less procedure. I can write more procedures and less sufficiencies. But can I write something 0? Can I write something 0? No. So are you understanding how to allocate marks, making them 5? So doing planning like such is important in exam paper. Are you understanding how I did the planning first before attacking the question? That first I should know how many requirements are there. Then I should know how many issues are there. Then I should know how many marks should I be gaining. And according to that, I know there can only be one adjustment. This is common sense, right? There is only one impact, that is common sense. Now, knowing the marks for adjustment and impact, do I know the remainder marks? And can I allocate the remainder marks to the 2 requirements? Writing one more and one less? So is that a better technique to do in an exam paper, that first make a rough working, and after making a rough working, then start to attempt your answer? Will that improve the quality of your answer? So is everyone clear on the structure of this question? So right after the break, will you be in a position to start with the issue 1, issue 2, and issue 3? Right? Now, please be very clear. We are going on a break for 15 minutes, and post 15 minutes, I will be starting on with the issue 1, issue 2, and issue 3. I will be doing 2 of the issues in the class, and I will be giving you the third issue as your homework. Then because I have to take on the December 12 exam even, because that is also a very complex question, right? So I will be guiding you upon the issue 1 and the issue 2, and then you will take upon the issue 3 yourself. You have this paper with you, December 11. It has been shared with you. So try to do one thing, that within the break, try to read the issue 1 and issue 2, so that we can pace up the answer plan for the first and the second issue. Is everyone clear so far? I will be looking for your feedback for the first 1 hour and 15 minutes about your learnings and about your overview of the first 1 hour and 15 minutes. So I'm off the break. There is a break till 7:32 p.m. the Pakistan Standard Time. So, and in the break, you need to read the issue 1, issue 2, and issue 3. Okay, now I'm off to the break, right? You also take a break, come back live after 15 minutes at 7:32 p.m. the Pakistan Standard Time to understand how to write an answer for December 11 and then the December 12 exams. Okay, welcome back after the break. And we now need to start on with the December 11, question number one. And we're looking at the three issues, right? And in these issues, we will be looking for sufficiency of the evidence, adjustment necessary, impact, and recommend the procedures. Now, just make me clear that have you understood that is the examiner asking us to write evidence in this question? Or does he wants us to judge whether the evidence is sufficient or not? So is the examiner asking us to write copy of the board minutes and results of recalculation and notes of discussion, or is the examiner wants to judge the evidence which has been gathered by the senior, is it sufficient or not? So is everyone clear on that? Okay, and then obviously the other things remains more simple. Okay, let's go down looking at the first issue, the issue number one. Okay, the first issue relates with the audit work on inventory. Let, cop Let me copy that and bring that to the Word file. And so I can do a very proper drill of that requirement. Okay, right in front of your screen is the audit work on inventory. And do we know the materiality in this question? The materiality in this question has been already given. So you are not calculating the materiality, right? They have given the thresholds, 800,000 for assets and liabilities and 250,000 for income and expenses. Normally we calculate the materiality, right? As we were doing in the session yesterday. But over here, the materiality has already been given. Is that strange? Because many times we don't see that happening in the past paper. Normally we calculate the materiality, right? By dividing them by the total assets or by the revenue or by the profit before tax. But over here, we have been given the materiality. Okay, now what's the first thing? We need to comment on the sufficiency as the very first thing. The comment on the sufficiency. Okay, I'm reading the case and I'll be asking you. Audit procedures performed at the inventory count indicated that the printed inventory items with a value of $130,000 were potentially obsolete, right? So $130,000 of a value of inventory is obsolete, right? These items were mainly out of date training manuals. The finance director, Cherry, has not written off this as she argues that paper on which the items are printed can be recycled, right? So the finance director has not written off $130,000 because she thinks that they can be recyclable and can be used again in future. However, the items appear not to be recyclable as they're coated in plastic. Now, auditor think that they cannot be recycled because they're coated with plastic. The junior who performed the audit work on inventory has requested a written representation from the management to confirm that the items can be recycled and no further procedures relevant to these items have been performed. Do you believe we have gathered sufficient evidence by just relying on the representation from management? Do you believe representation alone is a sufficient evidence? By just asking the management that give us a representation that the items are recyclable, should we have done something more beyond representation? Yes. So can I do my comment number one here? Comment on the sufficiency. See how am I commenting? Representation alone is not a sufficient, appropriate audit evidence and is to be used as a last resort, is to be used as a last resort. Evidence gathered by the auditor himself is more appropriate, and representation cannot be a substitute, cannot be a substitute of evidence. Representation cannot be a substitute of the evidence obtained by the auditor. See, I'm getting my first 1 mark. Is everyone clear on the very first 1 mark? Right? So representation alone is not sufficient appropriate audit evidence and is to be used as a last resort. Evidence gathered by the auditor himself is more appropriate, and representation cannot be a substitute of the evidence obtained by the auditor. So you all agree that we have gathered insufficient evidence in the case of the audit work on inventory. Okay, next, we need to do the adjustments. Do we need to write off the inventory? Do we need to write off the inventory? Do you all agree with that? Right? So when we write off the inventory, what should we debit? What should be debited? Good answer, cost of sales. And what should we credit? Inventory. Okay, so what is the adjustment? The adjustment necessary to write off the inventory is to debit the cost of sales and to credit the inventory. See, with that one line of an adjustment, you will get your 1 mark. So the adjustment necessary to write off the inventory is to debit the cost of sales and to credit the inventory. Are you clear with that? 2 marks, right? Then comes the third. Impact on the report. I'm doing in the order, right? In the order in which the question was going. Impact on the report. When we are writing the impact on the report, do we need to see whether the item is material or immaterial? Is that the first rule of thumb? I have to do reporting on the day 5, but I hope you have these logics very clear, right? That should we look at, is it material or is it immaterial? So is $130,000 material? How much is the materiality for income and expenses? 250. And how much is the materiality for assets? 800. So is it less than $800,000 for assets and $250,000 for income? So do you all agree this is immaterial, $130,000, because the materiality has already been given, right? So how are we going down with impact on report? There will be no impact on the audit report of the individual misstatement, as it is immaterial to both the balance sheet and the income statement. Yes, in this question, the materiality has already been given, right? So we're just comparing 130 with that with the thresholds given, right? Right. Please try to understand once again. This figures in front of your screen, right? Materiality has been determined as follow. We have been given a ceiling of materiality. Anything which is above 800 for assets will be material, and anything which is above $250,000 for income and expenses will be material. So $130,000, is it above $800,000 as an inventory? Right? So is everyone clear about how we are comparing 130 with the thresholds? So it should exceed that, right? It should exceed 800 or 250. It's not exceeding them, right? So we are saying there will be no impact on the audit report of the individual misstatement. Can there be an impact of an aggregate misstatement? Do you know that common sense individual and aggregate misstatement? Right? So individual misstatement, as it is material to both balance sheet and income statement, full stop. There will be no impact on the audit report. So how many marks are we getting for that? 1. Yes, even if it is material to one, there will be an impact. But in this case, it's immaterial to both, right? Had it been material to one, there would still have been an impact on the audit report, right? So have we got our 3 marks? Now we need to write the final thing, which is procedures. Okay. Now there is a problem in this question, right? Management is saying that the items can be recycled, and the auditor is saying the items cannot be recycled. So should we contact an expert who is an expert in recycling and ask him whether these items can be recycled or not? Because the management is saying they can be recycled, auditor is saying they cannot be. So can we contact an independent person here, like an expert in recycling, and ask him whether the items can be recycled or not? So should we write a procedure? And to write a procedure, what should we do? What is a good procedure? Recap quickly. To write a good procedure, what should we do? Action, source, purpose. Okay, number 1, correspond in writing with an expert in recycling. Correspond in writing with an expert in recycling to confirm whether the training manuals are recyclable or not, right? So correspond or discuss whatever you want to write. Correspond in writing or discuss in writing with an expert in recycling to confirm whether the training manuals are recyclable or not, right? Is that a good procedure to confirm who is right? Is the management right or is the auditor right? Okay, then next, because the management is saying they can be recycled. So should we discuss with management as to whether such items were recycled in past? Because the company is running the business, right? So can we discuss with management as to whether such items were recycled in the past? So can we ask this question to management? Because they think that it can be recycled. So can we take a justification from management on the basis why they are saying it can be recycled? Yes, we can say discuss with an expert, right? Correspond in writing with an expert or discuss with expert. It's up to you. But is everyone getting the clue of the 5 marks here? So was it a good question? Impact on report. Did you learn the different materiality here? Did you learn the different materiality here? The threshold was given. Have you ever seen such cases in the past papers? We normally calculate the materiality, right? But over here, the materiality threshold was given. We were just comparing, is it below, is it above? So is that a new learning you got? Is that the new learning we got? Right? Okay. Now, just quickly going down to the number 2, and the number 2 you will do yourself. I just want to guide you on something in the number 2 because I need to exit from this and start on with the December 12 exams. Okay, let's go down and just quickly browse over the number 2 situation. Okay, the number 2, audit work on provisions. Now, this is the number 2 situation in front of your screen. Let's go down reading it and let's quickly find in the answer. I'll leave this answer to you. I'm just quickly going down in the bullet form here. The first is to do the comment on the sufficiency, then is to do the adjustments, then is to do the impact, and then is to write in the procedures, right? The 4 things we have to do under this requirement. Okay, Willow Company is involved in a court case with competitor Aspen, which allege that a design used in Willow Company printed material copies one of the Aspen design, which are protected under the copyright. Our evidence obtained is a verbal confirmation from the lawyer. Do you agree that verbal confirmation from the lawyer is sufficient? Right? So, can you pick up the comment on the sufficiency? Verbal. verbal confirmation is not sufficient? And can you think about why? I'm not writing the full answer, right? You should be writing it yourself, but I'm just giving you a hint. Verbal confirmation is not sufficient, and think about the why to complete your 1 mark, right? Adjustment. Should we make an adjustment of the $125,000, which is probable to be paid? Chari Laurel has not made a provision, arguing that it is immaterial. Whether it is immaterial or material, should we make a provision? Do you all agree with that? So when I have to make a provision, what should I debit? Debit the expenses and credit the receivables. Sorry, credit the provisions, the liability. Credit the liability, the provision, right? Okay, what's the impact on the report? Is $125,000 immaterial on an individual basis? Dollar $125,000. Is it immaterial on individual basis? Do you agree with that? Is it immaterial on an individual basis? So there is no impact. But now think about aggregate. Now think about aggregate. 125 plus 130. How much this becomes? $255. Now, is 255 exceeding 250 on the income statement? We debited the cost of sales, right? We debited the cost of sales. Now we are debiting the expense. So is the debit side exceeding the income statement? Is everyone getting my point? It is still immaterial on the balance sheet. It is material on the income statement. Is everyone getting that point? The debit of the cost of sale and the debit of the expense, right? So $255,000 versus $250,000, which is the materiality for income statement. So has it become material? So on the aggregate basis, will there be an impact? Will there be an impact? Yes, and the impact will be a qualified opinion because the matter is material. So the auditor has to issue a qualified opinion. Right. Procedures you will do yourself, right? I'm not going down with procedures. I've already shared the answer with you. Try to see the answer, try to write the procedures, but I need to give you the structure. Is everyone clear on the structure of this December 11 question number 2? Is everyone getting to know what exactly to do in this December 11 question number 2? And how many of you are attempting this question for the very first time? Just give me quick responses. How many of you are attempting this question for the very first time? Right? So was it a good question? Has it given you some learnings? What if a question like such comes to your exam paper asking for adjustments and you're blank what to do for adjustments, what to do on the comment on sufficiencies, right? What to do on impact. Have you learned the individual impacts and the aggregate impacts from this? Have you learned the individual impacts and the aggregate impacts? Have you learned how to do the comment on the sufficiency? So is everyone clear on the verbs? If these verbs comes in your exam paper, comment on the sufficiency or adjustments or impact, can you easily handle them? Okay, now let's go down to the next question, which is December 12, question number 2. Please try to do the procedures yourself, complete the question, try to see my answer, which has been shared with you, and see if you can do the C part. Okay, now to the final question, right? Yet another challenging question. December 12th, the question number 2, right? It's interesting. Back to back, 1 year, December 11, the next year, December 12th. Question number 2, question number 2. Right. In just to clarify, there is a question coming up asking that in the C requirement there is a disclosure problem, right? Disclosure, we cannot debit something, we cannot credit something for disclosure, right? Disclosure itself is a adjustment. We should give disclosure. We should give disclosure as an adjustment, right? And disclosure is of a related party in the part C. So a related party disclosure is material irrespective of the value. So in the part C, December 11, question number 2, there is a related party disclosure, and related party disclosure is material irrespective of the value. So the adjustment you have to make is to give a disclosure, and obviously related party disclosure is material, so you have to issue a qualified report. In a reporting question, we normally do the individual misstatements and then we do the aggregate misstatement. That is a very common sense way of doing a question on reporting. Okay, let's start on December 12th, question number 2. Okay, now right in front of your screen is the December 12th, question number 2, which has been shared with you. Now, again, you will do something. In this question, which is right in front of you, December 12th, question number 2, go down and read this requirement in the first 2 minutes and try to understand what exactly is the examiner asking. Read this requirement and see the number of marks. Okay, you have 2 minutes. Read and understand the requirement in the blue box and tell me what is the examiner asking. Okay, and now again tell me how many of you is looking at this question for the first time? See, you skip this question and you go to the exam hall and you get a question like this in the exam paper. What will you do? Eh, You read the question for 18 marks, right? You read a question, you read this question of 18 marks. How many of you understand it at the first go? How many of you did understand what is the examiner asking in the very first go? Was it difficult? Was it difficult to accept at the first go the 18 marks here? Right, so now let's do the analysis. Let's take this to my Word file and let's first do a perfect drill of 18 marks. Okay, let's copy paste this right over here and do a perfect analysis of this question. See how significant these questions are, right? In December 11, it was for 15 marks, and over here it's for 18 marks. An examiner has a tendency of taking papers from the past paper, so you need to understand that, right? So let's go down, taking things into focus. Assess the implication of the key audit findings on the completion of the audit. In the last question, there was 3 issues, right? In this question, we have key audit findings. After the full stop, even in the last question, after the full stop, the examiner was telling us what to assess. And in this question again, the examiner is telling us after the full stop, your assessment must consider. So do we know what to assess? Is the examiner making that clear after the full stop? Your assessment. So let's see what we need to assess. There are some key audit findings in the case, whatever they are. In the last question, we had three issues, right? In this question, what we have? The findings of the auditor, the key audit findings. What does key audit finding means? The findings of the auditor. Now we have to read the findings of the auditor, and what we need to do. Number one, we'll see how many findings are there, right? Once we read the case study. Key audit findings. Number one, your assessment must consider whether the key audit finding indicates a risk of material misstatement. Whether the key audit finding indicates a risk of material misstatement. So you need to read the key audit finding and you need to see whether the finding indicates a risk of material misstatement. Do you know how to answer a question on risk of material misstatement? Or should I be telling you again? Do everyone knows how to answer a question on risk of material misstatement, the materiality, the treatment, the risk, and the impact? Okay, so whether the finding indicates a risk of material misstatement. Number two, where a key audit finding refers to evidence. Now, suppose you're reading a finding and the finding refers to evidence. There is something about evidence in the finding. For example, verbal confirmation. Now, when you're reading a finding which has a verbal confirmation because it refers to evidence, you must consider the adequacy of the evidence obtained. So if the finding relates with evidence, we should consider whether the evidence, is that like what we did just now, whether the evidence is adequate? Is that exactly what we did in the December 11 paper, whether the evidence is adequate only if the finding only if the finding relates to evidence. So when you're reading the findings and you come across a finding which relates with evidence, you need to judge whether the evidence gathered in the finding is adequate or not. How many marks we will get when we are commenting on evidence is adequate or not? One. So we will get 1 mark for commenting on the evidence. And how many marks we will get for risk of material misstatement? No, the one with materiality, treatment, risk, and impact. How many marks we will get? 3. And the one without materiality, treatment, risk, and impact. Please remember the lecture yesterday. Please remember the lecture yesterday. There were two marking schemes of the risk of material misstatement. Either we will get 3 marks or 2 marks. Is that true? Is everyone clear on that? Either we get 3 or 2 depending upon the situation. And for evidence, we will definitely get 1 mark. Now, how many marks we have to gain? 18. So sometime we will get 1, sometime we will get 2, sometime we will get 3. We will be accumulating to 18. Mirza Owais why 4.5? Is it a question? Is it a question which is saying comment on the matters and explain the evidence in the working paper file? Was that not a marking scheme I made only for one question? Comment on the matter and explain the evidence. Is the question asking for comment on the matters and explain the evidence, Mirza Owais? Or is it a question which is asking for risk of material misstatement, of which the marking scheme is coming from yesterday, and evidence is adequate? We just did the December 11 question, right? And in that question also, comment on the adequacy of the evidence was 1 mark. Is that clear with you, Mirza Owais? Because there was some confusion with you in terms of the marking scheme. Okay, is everyone clear on the marking schemes? Okay, let's start the question. Now, when you go down this question, can you see this key audit findings coming here? Key audit findings, statement of comprehensive income. Can you all see that heading, key audit findings, statement of comprehensive income? See the first finding. There are a total of 9 findings. I'm not doing all of them. The answer has been shared with you. I'll do some 3 to 4 findings just to give you a track, and you will do the remaining findings. The first finding says revenue has been stable for all components of the group, with the exception of one subsidiary, Coupland, which has recognized a 25% decrease in revenue. Does this finding number one is telling us something about evidence? Is the finding one telling us something about evidence? So can we comment on the evidence in the first finding? No, when I don't know what I have done, when I don't know what I have done, how can I comment on it? Just like the last question, it was telling me verbal confirmation. Then only I can comment, right? Or I took a representation from the management, then only I can comment. But if the question is not telling me what I have done, can I comment on the evidence? Was it not the examiner saying over here that if the finding relates with evidence, comment on the evidence? So is the finding number one relates with evidence? Can I get quick answers from all of you? Does the finding one relates with evidence? So can we comment on evidence? So can we comment on evidence in the first finding? No. So the finding one relates with something else, right? How much has the revenue declined? Revenue has been stable. Revenue has been stable for the components of the group, with the exception of one subsidiary, Coupland, the revenue of which has gone down by 25%. Now let's see note number one, right? If I see the note number one in the income statement, can you see the note number one in the income statement here? Note number one relates with revenue. Can you find out the percentage how much revenue has gone down from the last year? Take out your calculators and tell me how much revenue has gone down over the last year. 103, 100, and this year it's 98, 795. How much has the revenue gone down over the last year? 4%, 4.17%. Okay. Now, what is the examiner telling us? Examiner is saying revenue has been stable for all components of the group with the exception of Coupland, where the revenue has gone down by 25%. One of the subsidiary revenue has gone down by 25%. That does not mean the group revenue will go down by 25%, right? Because subsidiary is small and group is big. But do you believe there is a risk in revenue that revenue is overstated? Is that an inherent risk of revenue? Is that the inherent risk of revenue, that revenue is overstated? What if the fall in the revenue should have been more than 4%? Do you understand that? What if the fall in the revenue should have been more than 4% and the management has shown it 4%? Should we be skeptical about it? Is that the inherent risk? So there is a fall of 25% in a subsidiary. So subsidiary is small and group is big, right? So I'm not saying the 25% fall in a subsidiary will be exactly the 25% fall in the group, but at least it should have been more than 4%. I'm just thinking, I am just being skeptical. So can we say the revenue could be overstated because it has just fallen by 4%? Perhaps it should have fallen by more than 4%. So are we finding the risk of material misstatement? So will we get 3 marks or 2 marks here? We'll get 2 marks, right? So see how am I writing the first situation. Number one, the finding one, the revenue for the group has only fallen by 4.17% over the last year. The revenue for the group has only fallen by 4.7% over the last year, despite the fact that there has been, despite the fact despite the fact there there had been a significant decline of 25% revenue. There has been a significant decline of 25% revenue in one of the subsidiary. We are not sure, right? So we are saying thus the revenue for the group could be overstated. And I'm getting my 2 marks here. The revenue for the group has fallen by 4.17%. So I did effort finding this percentage. Examiner will be happy for that. Over the last year, despite the fact there had been a significant decline of 25% revenue in one of the subsidiary, thus the revenue for the group could be overstated. Is that good enough for everyone? Right, so now let's go to the next finding. Do you believe that if the revenue of one subsidiary is falling by 25%, is that an indicator for testing the goodwill for impairment? And Mohammed Farhan, this is not short for 2 marks. Your answer should be clear, right? Rather than you are doing unnecessarily lengthy answer. This was explained to you in the session yesterday, but still with questions like such popping in, make me realize that why students fail in the AAA exam, because you don't get the message that you need to write clear and concise answers, clear and concise answer. There was no need to write the accounting treatment here, right? There was more need to do the analytical procedures here, that how much it has fallen from the last year. So there was no need for accounting treatment because it was not mentioning the accounting treatment here. Okay, now my question was, do you believe that a 25% fall in the revenue of one subsidiary is an indicator for testing goodwill for impairment? Is that true? And should goodwill be tested for impairment every year? Is that the rule of thumb as per IFRS 3? Okay, yes. So let's see what's happening here. I'm just taking you ahead. Can you see the goodwill coming in the balance sheet here? Has the goodwill changed from the last year, or is it still the same? Will you be surprised in the exam paper if the goodwill remains the same, because you're attempting a question on risk, right? So if you're attempting a question on risk, will you be skeptical about the goodwill remaining the same, or will you just ignore it? Will you think about risk here, or will you just ignore and go ahead? What if the management has not done the impairment review, and the goodwill is overstated or goodwill is understated if no impairment review has been done? Okay, and is there an indicator of and is there an indicator for the impairment given in the case study? Yes. Okay, now let's go down and see the finding 5 where the goodwill is given. Can you see this finding 5 in front of you? The goodwill relates to each of the subsidiary in the group. Management has confirmed in writing that the goodwill is stated correctly, and our audit procedures was to arithmetically check the impairment review conducted by the management. Have we gathered sufficient evidence? And our audit procedures was to arithmetically check the impairment review conducted by management. Is that sufficient just to check the arithmetical accuracy of impairment review? Or rather than discussing with the management the basis of the recoverable amount and how they determine the recoverable amount, or how they find the value in use, or how they find the fair value? So should we have taken justification of the basis of recoverable amount from the management, or rather than just check the arithmetical accuracy? So do you find that in the key finding 5 there is an evidence as well? The key audit finding 5, there is a evidence as well? And do you all agree the evidence is insufficient in the key audit finding 5? And do you also believe there is a risk in the key audit finding 5? that the goodwill is overstated. So how many marks will I gain from the key audit finding 5? Do goodwill have a value? Do goodwill have a value? Can I find the materiality of the goodwill? Do goodwill have a value? Can I find the materiality of goodwill? Yes. Can I find the accounting treatment of goodwill, that the goodwill should be tested for impairment every year? And can I find the risk and impact? So how many marks will I get for goodwill? 3. And how many marks will I get for the sufficiency of the work I did on the goodwill? 1. So in total, how many marks am I getting from the finding 5? 4. Okay, so is that a productive finding? Finding 5? Let's see how to write the answer for finding 5, which relates with goodwill, and the finding 1 relates with revenue. This is exactly the way you're answering the question in exam paper. Now see how am I writing the answer. The goodwill is, can anyone find the percentage of goodwill materiality from the exam paper? How much was goodwill? 5350. And how much is the total assets? 118420. 118420 is the total assets. So can you find the materiality of the total assets, goodwill versus total assets? 5350 divided by 118420. Okay, it's 4.52%. Right. Is it material? Yes, goodwill is 4.52% of the total assets of the group, thus material to the group financial statements. Okay. The goodwill should be reviewed for impairment each year. The goodwill should be reviewed for impairment each year, and impairment loss should be recognized if the carrying amount exceeds the recoverable amount. So is that the accounting treatment? Now the risk. However, as the goodwill has remained static over the last year, dis despite, now see how you're connecting the case, despite coup planned revenue falling by 25%, there is a risk that goodwill could be overstated. So how many marks am I getting for this whole paragraph? 3. And is it exactly the same way I was writing the answer yesterday? There was no need of giving the treatment in the finding 1 because it was just a finding which relates with analytical procedure. We were just analyzing how much revenue has increased or decreased over the last year and comparing that with 25%. But in the finding 5, there was a goodwill which definitely have an accounting treatment. So we connected that with the accounting treatment. It was not talking about revenue recognition in the first point, right? It was just talking about the fall in the revenue. So fall in the revenue is a pretty simple analytical procedure. I hope that is clear, right? Okay, now should I write about evidence? The arithmetical accuracy, the arithmetical accuracy of the impairment review, the accuracy of the impairment review is insufficient alone, as the auditor should had been more investigative, of the basis on which the recoverable amount was determined. Is that true? The arithmetical accuracy of the impairment review is insufficient alone, as the auditor should had been more investigative of the basis on which the recoverable amount was determined. Aisha Wahid, we are saying that despite the fact that the co-planned revenue has fallen by 25%, still the impairment has remained the same because the co-planned revenue has fallen by 25% was an indicator of impairment. So that is why I'm taking 25% in my goodwill point, because that 25% fall in the goodwill was an indicator of impairment. I'm not talking about the group revenue falling. I'm talking about the falling of the revenue of the subsidiary, and the goodwill relating to that subsidiary should have been tested for impairment. I hope that's clear, right, Aisha Wahid? Okay, so how many marks am I getting from this last statement that the arithmetical accuracy of the impairment review is insufficient alone, as the auditor should have been more investigative of the basis? I'm getting an extra 1 mark. So in total, how many marks I got from finding four? Five, four. So out of the total 18 marks, how many marks have I gained so far? Six. So are you getting the track? Just let's do one more example. So we get more marks, and then the rest of the question you can continue yourself. So are you getting some sense of this question? Though at the very first go, it's difficult because most of you are looking at this question for the very first time. Even those who are even repeating the AAA exams, you're looking at this question for the very first time, right? So try just to understand when you are reading a finding and you think there is a risk in the finding, then try to identify the risk of material misstatement. And if you're reading a finding where you think there was something wrong with the evidence, then try to find, is the evidence sufficient or not, right? Azim Tariq, the marks allocation is simple. Whenever you comment on the sufficiency, you're getting 1 mark. And whenever you identify the risk of material misstatement, we discussed the marking scheme yesterday of the risk of material misstatement, that you get 3 marks for a risk of material misstatement, which have materiality, treatment, risk, and impact. And you get 2 marks for risk of material misstatement when there is no materiality. We did that situations yesterday. Okay, let's do one more finding. Let's go back to the question and let's do another finding. Okay, can you look at this finding number 9? Can you just read this finding number 9? A loan of $8 million. Do we have a value? And can we find the materiality? Yes. A loan of $8 million was taken out in October 2011, carrying an interest rate of 2%. October 11, payable annually in arrears. So can we calculate the finance cost October 11, and what's the year end of the company? Carrying an interest rate of 2% annually, right? The year end of the company is June. So October 11, we took the loan. The year end of the company is June. So October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, 9 months. Can you calculate the finance cost for 9 months? $8 million multiplied by 2% into 9 over 12. Can every one of you find the interest cost for 9 months? It's 120,000, right? It's 120,000, 0.12. Okay, that's good. The terms of the loan have been confirmed to the documentation provided by the bank. Is that sufficient that whenever we work on a loan, we just confirm the terms of the loan with the bank documentation? Is that sufficient procedures on loan? Or should we recalculate the finance cost and we should assure that the disclosures relating to the loan has been made properly? Or should we even confirm the receipt of the bank loan from the bank statement? Do you all believe this is sufficient just to read the documentation provided by the bank? No. So can we get 1 mark for sufficiency of evidence that just reading the documentation provided by the bank is insufficient? And can we also get marks on risk of material misstatement? Now, how much has finance cost increased? 120,000 as per your working, right? Now just go and see what's happening here. See the finance cost. See how much finance cost has increased from the last year. The finance cost has increased only by 40,000 rupee, $40,000 over the last year. Actually, how much it must have increased by? $120,000, right? So is there an understatement of the finance cost? Has the finance cost understated? By how much? So is everyone getting the risk of material misstatement here? That the actual increase in finance cost should have been a $120,000, but the increase has been just $40,000. So that means the finance cost has been understated by $80,000, right? So is everyone getting that? Right? Ashad Siddiqui, just try to keep it to the case, right? Just try to keep it to the case. The case is asking us to calculate the interest cost because the examiner has given us the parameter. So in the parameter, we are calculating the finance cost, connecting the finance cost with the case study. Again, what you are saying is in hypothetical thinking because the question was asking us to do so and link that back with the finance cost because the examiner has shown us the finance cost in the exam paper. So we could have easily identified the risk that the finance cost is understated. But Christina, will we be thinking about supportive arguments to management or will we be thinking about skeptical arguments? Because the argument you are raising seems that you're supporting the management. Whenever we are identifying the risk, do we support management or do we have negative thinkings? Can we do a risk question with positive thinkings? We can never do a risk question with positive thinkings, right? We have to do a risk question with the negative thinking that the management is always wrong. Then only we can find the risk. Is that clear, Christina? Right. So is everyone clear on the finance cost if I start to write it down? Okay, then we have the finding number 9, and I'm taking this as the last one, right? Finding 9, which is about the loan, and you start writing under the finance cost. The finance cost on the new loan of $8 million should had been 0.12, should had been $120,000. That is $8 million multiplied by 2% into 9 over 12 and the bracket close. The finance cost on the new loan of $8 million should have been $120,000 full stop. The actual increase in the finance cost as shown in the income statement is only $40,000. See, now a lot of you might say, why are we not writing the accounting treatment? See, you need to see the adaptation here. The basic point in the finding 9 was to calculate the finance cost and relate the finance cost back to the cost given in the income statement. So we just started it with a very different manner. The finance cost, the actual increase in the finance cost as shown in the income statement is only $40,000, which means that The finance cost is understated by $80,000 and the profit is overstated and the profit is overstated by the said amount, right? So that's how you're going down with this answer. And then you have to comment on the sufficiency of the evidence. Okay, let me go take you back to the case study just to find one thing out of the case study. Uh, okay, is the loan material $8 million? $8 million divided by 118. $8 million divided by $118 million. Yes, the loan is material. It's 6.7%, right? So let's write that even. The finance cost on the new loan of $8 million, that is material. Sorry, you can write it over here, full stop. The loan is material to the financial statements as it is 6.8% of the total assets, right? And we're getting the materiality, and with all those calculations coming in, though we didn't wrote the accounting treatment, but there was so much calculations involved in 120,000 and then finding the 40,000 and then saying the profit is overstated. This will all accumulate you to 3 here. And then the comment on the sufficiency, uh, only reviewing only reviewing the loan documentation is inadequate evidence as the auditor should had performed more substantive procedures. The auditor should have performed more substantive procedures on the loan, on the new loan obtained during the year. Should we start writing the procedures, what the auditor should do on the new loan? Should we tell examiner, yes, the order of MTRI can vary, right? Because yesterday was a structured class, so I was just going into the order. But now once you have learned that, you can vary the order. You can write materiality in the middle, you can write materiality in the end, you can write materiality in the start. You can vary the order, right? But that the rule of the thumb has to go in. Yes, the interest cost is not material, right? But the loan amount is material. We are taking the loan into focus, right? The loan you took has an interest rate of 2%. So we are taking the materiality on the loan. You can tell examiner that the loan is material and the finance cost is immaterial. You can do that way even, but that's perfectly fine to find the materiality on loan. So will we be telling the procedures to examiner, what procedures the auditor should have done on the loan? Can you see the exam question? The examiner was saying in the exam question here, you do not need to recommend further procedures. Can you see this line here? You do not need to recommend further procedures. In the December 11, the examiner was saying recommend further procedures, right? And in the December 12 paper, the examiner is saying you just comment on the sufficiency, but you should not be telling the further procedure. And what if you mistakenly write procedures? You're wasting your time. There is no negative marking, right? But you're wasting your time. Examiner is saying you should not write procedures here. So is everyone getting the sense of this question where the finding relates with risk? Where the finding relates with risk, try to find the risk, and where the finding relates with evidence, then tell whether the evidence was adequate or not. Is everyone becoming clear on that side? So will you assure that you practice the complete question with all the 9 findings? Even though you will get your 18 marks with less than 9 findings. Because see how many findings we did in the session today. We almost did 3 findings, and we got like 4 marks from the finding 9. We got 4 marks from the finding 5, that's 8, and we got 2 marks from the finding 1, 10. We got 10 marks from just the 3 findings. So you can make your 18 marks with less than 9 findings. So even you can skip, even if you can skip some findings, right? It's not exactly you go into every finding, because in one finding there can be more marks. So is everyone getting the track of how you will accumulate the remaining 8 marks? Because the 10 marks have been done in the session, right? And the remaining 8 marks you have to do it on your own. So will you be able to do it, everyone? Are you finding the track of the answer? And are you gaining confidence on a question like such, which asks you that from a finding find a risk, and from a finding find whether the evidence is sufficient or not? So have these two questions opened your mind for the September exams? It was tough questions, right? But has it opened your mindset 1 month ahead? So in the 1 month, can you plan questions like such? December 11 question 2 and December 12 question 2. Will you be doing them in full forms? And imagine you go into the exam paper without these 2 questions, and you get something similar to this. You might be surprised in the exam hall, and you might be sitting in a state of shock in the exam hall, right? Okay, just one last thing. See this finding number 3. Just read the finding number 3. Tell me, is there a risk in the finding 3? Is there a evidence in the finding 3? Are there both? You can in a question like such, Arsalan, you can do the analytical procedures, because a lot of time you get clues from analytical procedures. So when you have so much numerical data, you can compare the numerical data, because you can get a clue of a risk from comparison, as we have done so twice in this question. So the property revaluation relates with the group head office. Have you done revaluation yesterday? Do you know the accounting treatments of revaluation? Right? So the property revaluation relates to the group head office. The audit team have not obtained evidence on the revaluation. Can you get a blank statement like that? See, this is a blank statement, absolute statement. The audit team has not obtained evidence on revaluation, which is such a subjective area. Do you all believe this is subjective revaluation? And have we discussed yesterday that revaluation is inherently risky? And did we wrote the accounting treatment for revaluations? I'm not repeating those treatments, right? That was done in the day 1. But do you believe we should gather no evidence on revaluation, as the gain was immaterial based upon the initial calculation of materiality? What was the reason? The gain was immaterial on the basis of the initial calculation. Let's find whether the gain was immaterial or immaterial. Okay, let's go down and find the gain. Can you find the gain on revaluation from here? How much is the gain on revaluation from the last year? 800, right? Last year, the revaluation was 25. This year, the revaluation is 33. So how much it has gained from the last year? What is the gain? The gain is 800, right? You're all accountants and you're doing silly mistakes, right? Some is saying 3300, some is saying 2500. How much is the gain? The gain is the increase, right? 2500, 3300. So what's the increase? The increase is 800,000 from the last year. Now the auditor is saying this is immaterial. Let's find, is it immaterial or not? Now go up the question. Don't just be in a rush. Go up the question and read this. Read this paragraph and tell me, is the gain material or is the gain immaterial? Read this paragraph. There is no just one way of finding materiality, right? Most of you have wrote learned the way to find materiality, and that's the reason you're doing the errors. Just read this paragraph and tell me, is it material or not? So what was the materiality level? Initially, $900,000. So initially it was immaterial, but have we revised the materiality level to 700,000? So under the revised materiality of $700,000, is the gain material? Is the gain now material? Everyone sensing that? So should we have done work on the revaluation? But we have not done any work on revaluation. So firstly, when you're writing the answer, try to mention in the answer that the gain on revaluation is above materiality, above the revised materiality, and the auditor should have done work on revaluation, right? Let me fit that for you. We were discussing the finding number 4 on revaluation. Okay, let's give you another drafting. Finding 4, which is about revaluation, and you say that the gain on revaluation is $800,000, which is above the revised materiality of $700,000. Thus, the auditor conclusion, thus the auditor has, thus it is material and the auditor should had performed work on revaluation. As no work is performed, as no work is performed, the evidence, is the evidence inadequate or is there is no evidence? Inadequate means when we have done something less. Is there inadequate evidence or there is no evidence? As no work is performed, there is no evidence on revaluation in the working paper file. There is no evidence on revaluation in the working paper file. Is that clear? So we are gaining our first 1 mark. And then you can write upon, then you can do the same thing. You can find the materiality of revaluation as a whole. How much was the total revaluation this year? 3.3 million, right? So you can find the materiality of the revaluation. You can write the accounting treatment of the revaluation. You can think about the risk and the impact as we did yesterday from December 15 question, and you can gain 3 more marks here. So see, I've taken you to 14 marks now. I hope you can do the remainder for yourself. So have I taken you to the maximum answer now? Okay, now let's go to the recap of the entire 2 hours and 30 minutes. What have we done in 2 hours and 30 minutes? What have we learned in these 2 hours and 30 minutes? So just that you absorb this, and just before I close the session, you have the absorption of the day 2 and the key learnings of the day 2, right? Let's make a summary and try to concentrate on the summary because this is just where you need to absorb. Everyone, keep your focus and try to absorb what we've gone through in this day 2. Day 2 key learnings. Number 1, let's do them in the numbering form so you learn them. Number 1 key learning from the day 2 today. What makes a good procedure? Did you got an answer for that? Keep interacting with me. Keep interacting with me so I know you have learned something in the last 2 hours and 30 minutes. What makes a good procedure? Three things, right? ASP, action plus source plus purpose. Okay, that's good. Um, is there an ideal list? Is there an ideal list of procedures to think about? Is there an ideal list of procedures to think about? Have we covered that in the session today? Yes, we covered that in terms of minutes, source documents, plus recalculations, plus discussions, plus analytical procedures, right? Recalculations, discussions, plus analytical procedures. So did we got that from the examiner article? We did. Okay, the next question. Should we rote learn procedures? No. Rather, we should adapt. We should adapt to case. True. We did procedures on inventory where we contacted the expert to ask whether the materials can be recycled or not. Was that case specific, or was I just learning journal procedures of inventory write-off? Were I writing journal procedures of inventory write-off, or was I contacting the expert in the case study to know whether the materials can be recycled or not? So they have to be case specific. Okay. Last thing from procedures. Do you know the marking scheme for a procedure? Yes. And what's that? It's 1 mark per procedure. Okay, that completes procedures, right? The last thing, is there an article? Is there an article to read on procedures? Is there an article to read on procedures? And the answer to this is yes. The exam technique part 4, exam technique part 4 on procedures. Okay, that completes procedures, right? Okay, now let's do it on evidence. Okay, now keep your focus strong here, right? I'm asking you questions. Do respond me as quickly as possible. The first one, do you know what matters means in a question on evidence? Inverted commas open, comment on the matters. Do you know what comment on the matters means in a question on evidence? Yes, and comment on the matter means materiality, treatment, risk, and impact. And how many marks will I get for that? How many marks for matters in a question on risk, in a question on evidence? 4.5 marks. Okay, next. Evidence. What are main evidence in working paper file you should expect to find? Did we make a list of what are main evidences in the working paper file you should expect to find? Yes. Copies of management documents, results of recalculation, and results of analytical procedures. Okay, and then we got notes, right? Notes of discussions, right? And something in the evidence can be in the original form, like a representation letter can be in the original form, where we are not saying copy notes results, we're simply saying representation letter. Okay, next. When the examiner asks comment on the adequacy of evidence, or when the examiner asks comment on the sufficiency of evidence, are you clear what to do? Right? Simply say, why is the evidence insufficient? Why is the evidence insufficient? Tell the examiner, why is the evidence insufficient, to score your marks. Okay, and how many marks will I get for that? Marks for commenting on sufficiency of evidence or adequacy of evidence. How many marks will I get for that? 1 mark per comment. Okay, sorry, we missed out something. Uh, Marks per evidence in working paper file. How many marks will we be getting for evidence per working paper file? We'll be getting 1 mark per evidence, right? 1 mark per evidence. Okay. The final thing from evidence. December 2011 and December 2012. The final recap. Number 1, do you know what adjustment means in a question? Do you know what adjustment means in a question? Okay, fine. To make entries. If it can be entries, right? And it can even be a disclosure. If the examiner says disclosures are not made, then what's the adjustment? Disclosure should be made, right? Either it's the entry or it's the disclosure. It's the entry or it's the disclosure. Do you know what adjustment means? Number 2, do you know impact on audit report? Do we have to do it on the last day? Do we know the impact on audit report? It should be individual and it should be aggregate. So have we learned that individual and aggregate today, which will carry forward to the day 5 of the practice to pass on Friday. Okay, then a very important thing we get across in this, that so do you realize the importance of a combination questions like December 11 and December 12? Very deeply. Okay, that's a good answer. Now imagine you're preparing yourself for September 19 exams, and I hope you have found the importance of December 11 and December 12 papers, and they will play a very crucial part in your preparation towards your exams. I have done the typical questions on procedures in my previous webinars from June to March to December. You can you can go and watch them even, and I've even done the typical questions on comment on the matters and explain the evidence so many times in the past webinars. Again, the June, March, December, and continues. So I thought it is better to give you some challenging questions in September 19, because it is a high time, because examiner is making some very challenging questions in past papers. So you should have a better idea about what sort of challenging questions have come in the past paper, so you can handle them. So my responsibility is to choose the critical questions, whether they have come in recent past or they've come in the earlier past. So when I choose questions for webinar, there is a sense behind that, and there is a deep analysis behind that to choose the right question, which matches the temperament of the examiner, so that you get the best practice within the 5 days of this practice to pass webinar. Now, I will be looking forward to your feedback. If you can quickly start dropping your feedback of the overall day two, and how would you rate the day two in terms of your feedback? That would be really important for me to analyze, and really important for me to think about the day three. And in the meantime, I would also be answering some of the questions which came from the student over the day two. Firstly, there were a lot of questions from students asking about the there is a question, right, from a student asking about how to polish our accounting standards knowledge for AAA exams, as I am taking exams after a very long time. Yesterday on the WhatsApp group, I have no idea whether you are on the WhatsApp group or not, which I've made for this September 19 Practice to Pass webinar. I've already shared the summaries of the accounting standards, right? So if you want to polish up your accounting standards, you can go down and see the summaries of the accounting standards, right? Which can really help you building your knowledge around the accounting standards. Okay, there is another question from Arsalan asking group E, F, or G. What's that? Um, Arsalan, couldn't get your question. Group E, F, or G. They are basically the syllabus areas, right? Syllabus area E, F, or G. If you've seen the syllabus guide of AAA exams from the ACCA website, it consists of A, B, C, D, E, F, G. These are 7 syllabus areas. So I try bifurcating the 7 syllabus areas in my slides, in my presentation slide. So these are basically the syllabus areas. Okay. Okay, how to complete the paper in 3 hours and 15 minutes. I will be doing that on the day 5. So wait for day 5 to come so I can guide you about the final aspects of completing the paper in 3 hours and 15 minutes. So I need to keep something for the day 5. So I'll do that on the day 5. Aisha Wahid, the sufficient practice is to do the recent papers. I think the sufficient practice is to do at least 4 years, 2015, 16, 17, and 18. If you have done papers from 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018, and even if you've done the questions which has been recommended in the practice to pass webinar, they will be really good practice. Is there any chance of a current issue? It's been asked by Saud Khan. So far, no, because there is no article on current issue yet for exams in September. The last article on current issue was tested in the June 19 exams. So there is no chance of current issue yet for September 19 exam. Saddam Hussein, yes, you need to have a basic knowledge of accounting standards, not an in-depth knowledge. In the Kaplan book and in the BPP book, right? There are good summaries given. So Kaplan book or the BPP book, you can see the summaries of the accounting standards, and I've even shared the summaries of the accounting standards on the WhatsApp group. Okay, there is a question coming from Bilal Farooq asking, please also explain what are typical matters which we should discuss with management and those charged with governance, as I have seen this requirement in so many questions. Yes, Bilal, in terms of matters you communicate to management and those charged with governance, obviously during the course of the audit, you come across many issues like accounting issues, something like a change in accounting policies, or there is an accounting disagreement, or there is something like the management is not providing evidence to the auditor. Any issues, whether those issues pertains with ethical issues pertaining to the auditor, or there are any accounting issues pertaining to the management, so you need to discuss them with those charged with governance and the management. Even the Bilal Farooq, the question we were doing today, December 11, question number 2, If you can see the second part of the question, it also contains the requirement matters to be communicated to those charged with governance. And you will see that there are so many issues in the question which you need to communicate to management. I think you can get a better understanding of what sort of matters we communicate to the management if you look at the second part of the December 11 question number 2. And if after that you have any questions, you can raise them in the sessions to follow. Okay, Usman Farooq is asking, is there any chance of business risk in September 19? Obviously, we cannot be living on chances. We cannot be blunt on that. But yes, business risk came in the last exam setting, and for that reason has less chances. You cannot rule it out, but yes, the chances are less for business risk coming in. Ashad Siddiqui is asking how to avoid speculative risk to approach. The only way you can avoid speculative risk to approach is that try to write the risk which are given in the case study as we were doing yesterday. So try to identify the major risk in the case study, the important risk in the case study as I drilled with you yesterday, rather than thinking about hypothetical risk from the case study. For a contingent liability, we should calculate materiality using total assets or profit. Yes, if primarily it's a balance sheet item, so you should do it on the total assets. But if you can do it on both, and whichever is higher prevails, right? So if it is higher on the PBT, then whichever is higher prevails. Arsalan, I've already covered business risk in my previous webinars, so you can watch the previous webinars for business risk practice. Okay, that is it for the Q&A sessions. We're just running short of time now. It's just time to wind up the day 2. Just a quick reminder that tomorrow again live with day 3, which is a day on ethical and professional issues. I will be joining you tomorrow with day 3, which is on ethical, professional, and quality control issues, which is another very important area and an area where students are very blur at. So you will be gaining a lot of knowledge tomorrow, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. the Pakistan Standard Time. Do join live for an interesting and an insightful discussion on ethical, professional, and quality control issue. Thank you so much for all the attendees who participated live in the session today. I hope you got benefit of taking this session and benefit of identifying the problems, issues, and mistakes you do regularly in the AAA exams, right? I am Kashif Kamran, and it's time to sign off from the day 2 and then meeting you back again on day 3 tomorrow. Please ensure that you keep revising what you are learning from these sessions because that is really, really important. You have very less time left for exams coming up in September. So please ensure whatever learning you are getting from the sessions, you keep revising them perfectly, right? So it's time to say you goodbye and Allah Hafiz. Have a nice day and see you back tomorrow with the day 3 of this Practice to Pass webinar.